Hey folks, here we are, the last Bible study for this Bible study devotional for this week. And if you've been with us, you know that the theme of this week is the themes of justice, pulling out the places where justice is used in the biblical text, both old and new, places where, literally the word justice is used, or pulling out a number of places that speak to justice and the ideas of justice. And all this inspired by the life of the late Representative Congressman John Lewis, and just lots of the things that I read and watched over the last couple weeks since his death, and reflecting upon the amount of biblical language, imagery, understanding that the civil rights movement was based upon, that the civil rights leaders used in their writings and in their speeches. Some of the most powerful speeches and images from civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Are quotes of biblical text, and many of the civil rights leaders were educated theologically, whether that was at seminary or Bible colleges, but they had a biblical and a theological education to them. And so what we've been trying to do with some of these passages, like the one we have today, is to look at it and see what was the situation in which it was written, what was going on in that passage 2,000 years ago, in that place 3,000 years ago. And then that can help give us a fuller understanding to why and how the civil rights leaders use that same passage so profoundly. So today we're going to be in the book of Micah, so start looking for that. It's not easy to find. It's one of the minor prophets, small little book, maybe 5 or 6 pages, almost at the end of your Old Testament. So I'll sort of intro this while you're looking for the book of Micah. Might take a little while. So a couple days ago, we were talking about Amos, and Amos was this peasant, this herdsman who was called by God to be a prophet during a particular time in Israel's history. Micah is at the same place in that history. So Israel has, they've sort of just gone up and down as a culture, as a nation, sometimes wealthier, sometimes impoverished, sometimes they're the conquerors, sometimes they are conquered, and they are at a particularly positive time in their history. They're at a time in which they are governing all of the promised land, and they have conquered a number of other countries around. They're at a time in which they're relatively prosperous. You conquer all of those countries, you collect taxes from them, so they're relatively prosperous. For a couple of generations, there's an elite ruling class that has gained in power and stature. And the temple, the church, has had to struggle with whether to be on the side of this elite ruling class or whether to be the critique of the elite ruling class. You know, sometimes the elite ruling class, what they did was they grew their power at the detriment, or to the detriment to others. They grew their bank accounts to the detriment to others. And so the prophets come, and the prophets see this, and God speaks through the prophets to the people and really condemns the religious leaders and condemns Israel for siding with the elite, powerful ruling class and leaving out the poor. Now, you can see this all over. The church has made this mistake time and time and time again throughout history. But you can also see it not just in the church, but very difficult if there's an elite ruling class who's saying, hey, come and be with us, and some of what we have will trickle down to you, that you'll have a little bit more in the future than you have now, that you would be a hardline critique of those folks and say, no, I'm not coming with you. I'm staying here with the poor and the downtrodden. Well, they don't do that. The temple leaders don't do that. They go with those religious elites. With the political elites. And so the prophets speak. So Micah chapter 6, verse 6. And what I want to point out to you is verse 6 and 7, you'll see have quotes. And so the question is, who's talking here? You know, whenever you see quotes in the biblical text, you have to wonder, right? I mean, you have to sort of reconstruct the argument. Who's talking? So the person in this passage who is talking is an Israelite who is caught between, do I listen to the prophet and God, or do I go with the political elites? They're caught. They're on the side of the political elites, but now they're going to temple. What do they do when they go to temple? And it's this person who's talking to him or herself in these first two verses, asking the question, essentially, what does it mean to be faithful in the world in which I live right now? With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? See, so this is the Israelite wondering out loud, what does God want from me? How am I going to make this right with God? Then verse 8, the prophet answers. Of course, the prophet speaks the voice of God. The prophet answers the Israelites' question. And the prophet says, he has told you. So God has told you, O mortal, what is good? And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now here the person was that stuck with the political elites and knows, so the person's convicted, I've done wrong. I have sided with the political elites, and I have forgotten the poor and the downtrodden, and really forgotten God, to be quite frank with you. And so I'm repenting. I'm coming back to God. Now, what do I come back to God with? The most precious calf I have, hundreds of, thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil, my firstborn, the fruit of my body, right? He's giving all of these things of great value. And the prophet says, no, it's not about the money you give. It's not about the value that you or the world assign to these things. What God actually wants is for you to value God's creation in the same way that God did. To value the poorest as much as the rich. To value the widow as much as the mom with a whole brood of children. To value humanity as God values humanity. That would be the most valuable gift. That's what the Lord requires of you. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. This is a passage that was used often in the civil rights movement to talk to other folks who were, it was used by leaders to talk to other folks who were joining them in the civil rights movement, to say this is a non-violent movement. This is a movement where we are going to do justice, and we are going to love kindness, and we are going to walk humbly with our God. No matter what they do to us, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to treat others in this way. because we value them. So I think the question that this passage really always makes me ask is, what is my value for others, especially for the least of these? How do I value them? And you read the Gospels, and what you see is that Jesus is sitting at the table with them. And Jesus is giving up his seat so that they can have it. And Jesus is feeding them, and Jesus is forgiving them. Jesus is with them. He's actually ridiculed for spending too much time with those people. He's ridiculed because he values those who the world doesn't value too much. Man, might just once in our lives we receive that kind of ridicule. People that ridicule us for loving the ones who the world doesn't love. You guys love them too much that we might receive that kind of ridicule. Then we know we would be walking in the footsteps of Jesus. May justice be done in our world. Amen.